Right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Imprint IAS. And as a part of Imprint Knowledge Solution, I welcome you to the third chapter, right, on the series on post-independence. And I'm Varun Khullar, and I'm going to talk about the national movement and its legacy today. But before that, what we're going to do, as we always do, we're going to revise the previous chapter, that is chapter number 2. Right. So, the chapter number 2 was colonial legacy, and in this chapter, we talked about the basic structure of the basic features of the colonial structure, and the idea being that colonialism had completely made India subservient to the economy, right, of Britain, right, and so that was the basic idea behind this. The uh, the colonialism led to complete but in complex integration of India's economy with the world's capitalist system, but it was a subservient position. And we talked about the fact that from the 1750s, India economic interests were subordinated to of Britain. And there was a very interesting thing that India became an exporter of foodstuff and raw materials, and it imported the British industrial goods and basically supported the British industrialization and the Industrial Revolution. And we talked about the fact that the surplus, right? The third point was that the surplus that was generated was very, very low. That is 2.75% of GNP from 1914 to 46. And if you see from 71 to 75 or even today, that was 12%. Today it is more than 20. Varies between 25 to 33% depending on the year. Then the idea being that even if there was a surplus, it was misspent or it was basically taken up by our very, very expensive civil services and colonial structure. And whatever was left maybe was just taken away, appropriated by the landlords and money lenders. Then India's policy were mainly determined in the interest of Britain's economy. There was a denial of support to industry and agriculture, right? The currency policy was manipulated by the government to favor British industry, and this can be seen in the civil disobedience movement demands by Gandhi, right, in 1930 to Lord Irwin, right. Before the Dandi March and civil disobedience movement, Gandhi actually always right gave a list of demands to the Britishers, and even if they didn't compromise, then basically he launched a right movement. So the bulk of the revenue absorbed by the military and civil administration we talked about, it was nearly 50% from 1890 to 1947 of the total taxes. Then colonialism obviously was a fetter on a structure. It was dominated by landlords and money lenders and merchants. And obviously we see the national movement today when we talk about it, that how it was more and more related to that. The colonial state, obviously, the big divide, which is, we normally talk about something known as Bharat versus India, right? And that is something that is a result of the British education. The fact that, we have, people who can speak well in English vis-a-vis people who can't. Then, obviously, prevented the development of Indian languages. It destroyed a logical analytical thinking. It encouraged learning by rote, which is still a problem today. Memorization of text and proof by authority, because we mainly were looking for English baboons. And at the end of the day, we are not looking for anything else. That is the Britishers. Then obviously there was a huge paradoxical structure. On one hand, they were autocratic and authoritarian. On the other hand, they had rule of law and independent judiciary. Then obviously they were a colonial state. On the other hand, they regularly offered constitutional and economic concessions. It was as if the Britishers were themselves confused about themselves, what they wanted. The colonial legacy was marked, obviously with the unity of India. And at the same time when India was unified, they set into motion contrary forces. They divided class against class, religion against religion, Hindus against Muslims, landlords and princes against the national movement, right? But that was very, very strange because, on one hand, you're united India, on the other hand, you want to divide it. Then, again, the next paradox was the, highly paid ICS officers who were, obviously very, very honest in comparison to the paradox that existed in the lower bureaucracy, which was very, very corrupt. Also, the paradox was being that they formed an exclusive caste and worked against democracy and were a challenge, as still they are, a challenge to the development of India right today. That's one of the most interesting things, maybe something which we always should thank for the Britishers, was for apolitical, right? Totally apolitical army, and that was basically a contrast to the newly developed country of Pakistan, where today, if you think about it, is the military and the bureaucracy ruling, right? So I think that so with that, the revision for chapter number 2 is done, and let's now start. Right. Okay. So let's start. And this is the book, right? India After Independence, 1947 to 2000, by Bipin Chandra, Middleram Mukherjee, and Aditya Mukherjee. I would urge you to buy this book, right? It's a wonderful book, and it's a must read for anybody who is taking UPSC. Irrespective of the fact whether you do a cost benefit analysis or not, this is a must read, right? It will enlighten you about what is India. And I think that is something that's a necessary for every Indian citizen. I don't even care if you're a civil servant or you're not, you should definitely go through this book. Right, and let's go through the chapter, the national movement and its legacy. Right, so an appreciation of the 100-year-old freedom struggle is integral to the analysis of developments, right, in post-1947 India. While India inherited its economic and administrative structures from the pre-colonial and colonial periods, the value, the ideals, the vision, and the well-defined comprehensive ideology that were to inspire it in national building were derived from the national movement. It was, the ethos of Gandhi, of Nehru, of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, of Vinoba Bhave, of Tagore, right? And even, the other side of the spectrum that inspired India. What it did was it created an era of mass politics. Tens of thousands of the most humble cadre disseminated the ideology among common people in urban and rural areas. And it was these ideals which were given by the national leaders and the national movement that played a crucial role in integrating and keeping together Indian society and polity in the last 5 decades. And for this, Jawaharlal Nehru characterized India's national liberation movement as a continuing revolution, right? And it is in fact these ideals by which parties and people are still judged in India, right? And you can take the example, we talk about the example of dissent being integral to the Indian discourse. And when there was a Supreme Court issue, there was talk about stifling of dissent was the biggest challenge to Indian democracy today. Now, let's look at the character of national movement, right? The freedom struggle in India is perhaps the greatest mass movement in world history. After 1919, it was built around the basic notion that people could play an active role, like females, right, who never had a say in India, couldn't even get out of the Char Diwari, as they normally say. They actually came out, right, of their houses and played an active role in the non-cooperation, in the civil disobedience movement, in the Quit India movement. Arnas, Asif Ali, Usha Mehta were legends of the Quit India movement, right? And the other thing, it empowered everyone, right? Anyone participating. So Satyagraha was based on the active participation of the people and on the sympathy and the support of the non-participating as well. Right? The idea was that if it was a violent revolution, it wouldn't be needing the political mobilization and the passive support of the majority. Because it was a non-violent revolution, it required everyone to be actually supporting it. Right? And the Indian national movement was totally committed to the idea that we will have a representative democracy with full range of liberties for the individual. And this was very, very, interesting, because that was not the case of any other country, even today, right? From the very beginning, it popularized democratic ideas that we should have equality, rule of law, right? Institutions, it basically among the people. It basically said that it struggled for the introduction of parliamentary institutions on the basis of popular election. They demanded the introduction of adult franchise, our leaders, right? And paid attention to the defense of the freedom of the press and speech against attacks by colonial authorities, besides promotions of other political and economic policies. Right. The most interesting was the Congress ministries in 1937 when they were formed, and this was happened during the British period. They extended civil liberties to even the resurgent peasants, workers, student movements, and radical groups such as the Socialist Party and the Communist Party. Right. The most interesting thing is the basic idea that we will have a debate even with somebody who does not agree with us. Take, for example, the decision in 1920 to start the non-cooperation movement, right? And it was taken with 1336 voting for, and 884 voting against Gandhi's resolution that non-cooperation should be launched. Similarly, at Lahore Congress in 1929, where Gandhi was asked to take charge of the coming civil disobedience movement, a resolution by him condemning the bomb attack narrowly won from 942 to 794. So it tells you that even Gandhi didn't basically force his ideology on the Congress, right? Gandhi wanted to cooperate with the Britishers during the Quit India movement, right, during the Second World War, but it was rejected by the Congress, and Gandhi didn't force his view again. So basically, the whole purpose of all this exercise was to allow dissent and tolerate and encourage different opinions and minority opinions to be freely held and expressed. And this allowed India to actually exist. This allowed that we don't turn into, Pakistan or maybe some other country, or tyranny in Africa, and so on, right? The idea was that even our leaders, major leaders, was wholly committed to civil liberties, and the most famous of them is Lokmanya Tilak, and he said, "Liberty of the press and liberty of speech give birth to a nation and nourish it." Gandhi in 1922 said, "We must first make good the right of free speech and free association. We must defend these elementary rights with our lives." In 1939, again, he says, "Civil liberty is consistent with the observance of non-violence and is the first step towards Raj." And right, what he said was that there's no room for dilution, right, or compromise in this. It is the foundation of freedom, and it is a water of life, and he has never heard of water being diluted, right? So again, everyone, take the example of the third person, Nehru, 1936. He said, "If civil liberties are expressed, a nation loses all vitality and becomes impotent for anything substantial." Now, you can use any of these quotes for your answer on GS2, right? And that's what I'm saying, right? That's why this book is a must. If you haven't read all these quotes, you will not be able to use them in your answers in GS2. That is, if there's a question comes on fundamental rights, Article 19, freedom of speech and expression, even right to privacy, you can talk about that, right? And in the Karachi Congress of 1931, this guaranteed the freedom of speech, opinion, of press, and of association, which became further Article 19 of the Constitution. Okay. Political trends and groups otherwise critical and often at the ends of political ideology spectrum, vigorously defended each other's rights. So take, for example, the moderates. So Gopal Krishna Gokhale, Surendranath Banerjee defended the extremist Tilak's right to speak and write what he liked. Congressmen, votaries of non-violence, defended Bhagat Singh and other revolutionary terrorists being tried in Lahore. And also the communists being tried in the Meerut conspiracy case. That tells you something, that despite the fact that I don't like you, I don't believe in what you do, but I do believe in you having the right to speak and do as you like. In 1928, the Public Safety Bill and the Trade Dispute Bill aimed at suppressing trade unions, the left wing and the communists were opposed not only by Motilal Nehru, but conservatives and communalists like Madan Mohan Malviya and M.R. Joykar. Indian capitalists such as Ghanshyam Das Birla and Purushottam Thakur Das also opposed it despite being capitalists, right? So the idea was that the basic notions of popular sovereignty, representative government, and civil liberties were to be exercised against the rulers, and they were not a part of India's tradition, right? But they were basically, if you think about it, a lasting contribution of the colonialism. It was a national movement and not the bureaucratic authoritarian colonial state that indigenized and rooted them. That is, representative government, civil liberties, and popular sovereignty. That these three were the cornerstones, right? Please note them down: popular sovereignty, representative government, and civil liberty. If you talk about India, talk about these three things. Always. There was a question, compare India to USA. I think the most interesting thing would be that, India believes in popular sovereignty, representative government, and civil liberty to a very different extent than, the US does, right? Okay, let's continue. If free India could start and persist with a democratic polity, right? Now the question is, which you will get, is, India, despite not being rich, right? It was always a lower income country, never turned into a dictatorship, right? It was predicted again and again that India would turn into a dictatorship, right? And India is a one, party government, right? It will never, become a multi-party system, right? So the idea was that, the why it had happened that Pakistan turned into a military dictatorship again and again, right? While India, despite having a bout of emergency from 1975 to 77, actually could again become a democracy, right? So the idea was it was because of the national movement. It was because they had imbibed the civil libertarian and democratic tradition among the people. It was a tradition that was reflected in the constitution, which proved Cassandras, who had been repeatedly predicting that democracy and civil liberty could not survive in a society so divided by language, religion, caste, culture, and the absolute minimum prosperity or economic development, such was the case in Western Europe and United States. It is this tradition that explains why multi-party democracy and civil liberties have met different fates in India and Pakistan. The political party that brought about Pakistan was not known for its defense of civil liberties, or functioning on democratic lines, or tolerance towards political opponents. Democracy was a significant part of its political culture, right? So it was not a significant part of its democratic culture. So besides, the national movement and its political culture were precisely weak in the areas that came to constitute Pakistan. So Quit India movement, if and civil disobedience movement, if you read about them in detail, you'll realize it was not strong in areas of Pakistan, right? That is Sindh, Northwest Frontier, etc. To conclude, the nationalist movement successfully created an alternative to the pre-colonial and colonial political culture. And the ideology and the culture of democracy and civil liberties, which was based on dissent, freedom of speech of expression, majority principle, and right of minority opinion to exist and develop, was a facet of the national movement. Right. Now let's look at a different way of looking at the national movement. We look at the economic underpinnings, the basic reason why the capitalist class of India actually supported us. Right. So Jawaharlal Nehru talked about what would be the idea of India after independence. Right. He said that self-reliance, that would be one thing that we're looking at. We want to avoid economic imperialism. Right. We want to obviously encourage international trade. The nationalists basically accepted from the beginning with unanimity that we have to develop modern agriculture and industry. There has to be basis on modern science and technology. They've held that India had to industrialize or go under. Indian nationalists were opposed to the unrestricted entry of foreign capital because basically it replaced and suppressed Indian capital and also created conditions of foreign political domination, which was the basic critique of the colonialism. Now, during the 30s and 40s, agrarian relations also became an objective of the national movement. All intermediary rent receivers such as zamindars and other landlords were to be abolished, and agriculture should be based on peasant proprietorship. That was the basic idea. Then the Resolution of Fundamental Rights and Economic Program at Karachi session of the Congress, that is 1931, said that the state shall own and control key industries, services, mineral resources, railways, waterways, shipping, and other means of public transport. There were two ideas about the development of India after independence, and the leaders were already ready with it even before India was independent. 1938, the National Planning Committee, that is, and the Indian capitalists themselves had another plan. They wanted another thing. They wanted state to actually help them in the initial years, and that was the Bombay Plan. Gandhi was the basic, only person who disagreed with emphasis of modern industry because he thought that was a reason of our, problems, right? But in time, he, agreed to us, the others. And all large-scale industries, he said that should be just owned by the state and not by private capitalists, right? And the culture of Indian polity at that time can be seen from the fact that he made Nehru his heir, despite the latter's commitment to the development of industry and technology, agriculture on the basis of science and technology, which Gandhi didn't agree on. Right, but at the same time, the national movement accepted Gandhi's perspective on the cottage and small-scale industries, and this was seen in the second five-year plan, and we'll talk about it later much more in detail in another chapter. Now, India's national movement was quite radical, right, by modern standards, even by contemporary standards. It had a pro-poor orientation, right, and it was not just pro-poor for a slogan, just like Gribi Hatao. It was actually pro-poor. The poverty of the masses and the role of colonialism was a source of starting point in Dada Bhai Naoroji's economic critique of colonialism, With Gandhi and the rise of the socialist current, this was even more strengthened, and removal of poverty became the second most important objective next to the overthrow of colonialism. Socialist ideals became more and more prominent, attracting young nationalist cadre, and basically they became the dominant current. But in some ways, they could not. What basically Nehru thought was a civilized standard of life, so as to attainment of a equal opportunity, a reality, should be the focus of India, right? And we were basically focused, right, to carry out basic changes in society, economy, and polity. Congress in the Karachi session declared that, right, to stop the exploitation of the masses, political freedom must include real economic freedom. And Gandhi declared, basically to this radicalism, the thought that the land belongs to those who work on it and to no one else, right? And so basically, in one way, he was saying that there should be no landlords or zamindars in India. If you work on land, you will have it. If you're not, you don't. As an aspect of its commitment to the creation of egalitarian society was the nationalist opposition to all form of inequality, discrimination based on sex and caste. Right, and if you think about it, after the 1920s, caste inequality and oppression, abolition of untouchability was the cornerstone that we want that to end, right? And that was the idea behind which the Constituent Assembly had the reservation for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, and the passage of the Hindu Code bills in the 50s for the social liberation of women. Though obviously some laws have been passed, much too soon for them to be effective. The next question which we have is on secularism, right? So how was secularism defined? And it's a question which again has come in UPSC in even this year, 2018, and even before, right? How is Indian secularism different from the West, right? But let's look at that, how it is different. Secularism was defined in a comprehensive manner, which meant the separation of religion from state and politics. The treatment of religion as a private matter for the individual, the state's neutrality towards or equal respect towards religion, the absence of discrimination between followers of different religions, and active opposition to communalism. Congress, in its Karachi resolution of 1931, declared that free India, every Indian would have the right to conscience, to freely profess and practice their religion. There will be equality before law, irrespective of caste, creed, or sex, and no disability shall be attached in regards to public employment, office, or honor in the exercise of trade or calling, and the state shall observe neutrality in all religions. Now, this basically became the basis of Article 14 to 16 of the Constitution, right? And if you basically get a question on secularism, I think you can use a couple of quotes, which what Gandhi said. He says that in 1942, religion is a personal matter which should have no place in politics. Very interestingly, remember, Gandhi basically had always emphasized a close connection between his religion and politics. But when he realized that religion was being misused by the communalists, he basically said religion is the personal affair of each individual. It must not be mixed up with politics or national affairs. And on the other hand, Nehru saw communalism as the Indian form of fascism, and basically he thought that that should be the case. Interestingly, leaders of the national movement never appealed to people on religious grounds. Their critique was invariably economic, political, or social. They never said the British are Christians, therefore we should throw them out. They never said that, right? Which was very interesting. Let's talk about the next thing, that is India as a nation in the making. The leaders of the colonial movement acknowledged the role of the colonialism in unifying India economically and administratively, right? And they always believed that at the end of the day, somehow India was created by British, and they did help us in that sense. But what basically they realized was the notion of structured nation did not contradict its unity, right? They did not acknowledge but also appreciated India's rich linguistic, ethnic, and regional diversity. They said that the emergence of a strong national identity and flowering of other narrow identities were to be seen as mutually reinforcing projects. That you can be a Punjabi, you can be a Haryanvi, you can be a Tamilian and still be Indian. And that is something that maybe today we are forgetting, right? Chak De India, and all those movies talk about the fact that you have to see yourself as an Indian and not as a Punjabi and not as a Hindu or a Muslim. You can see yourself as a Muslim, you can see yourself as a Hindu, you can see yourself as a Christian, you can see yourself as a female or a male or a transgender and so on, and still be Indian. The diversity in multiple identities are not obstacles, but positive features that were the sources of strength to Indian culture, civilization, and nation, and were integral to the emerging nationhood. The regional cultural identities dwelt not in opposition, but in as a part of national movement and all Indian identity. Let's look at foreign policy, which was thought. Very interestingly, India was again has a very clear stance opposition to colonialism and sympathy and support for the people fighting for independence. In the 30s and 40s itself, it took a very strong fascist stand. Gandhi condemned Hitler and said that in 1938, if there could be a justifiable war in the name of or for humanity against Germany to prevent wanton persecution of the whole race, right, would be completely justified. Right, he said that okay, maybe violence could be permitted against Germany if it could be. Right, Nehru also talked about the fact that there's imperialists and fascists on one side and socialists and nationalists on the other, and we should take our stance towards the progressive forces against fascism and imperialism. It is very interesting that Indian nationalism was never chauvinist or jingoist, right? It never opposed or hated British imperialism. It trained its cadre to eschew hatred and bitterness towards the British people. So we don't hate the Britishers. Somehow, it's very interesting that Indians don't hate Britishers. We don't curse them for our poverty, but we are willing to basically say Pakistan high, high. It's extremely shocking and extremely odd. I think if something we should actually want to take revenge against somebody, it should be against. If you want a national entity and you want to do something against, I think it should be against the Britishers who actually destroyed Indian industries, killed so many people, created famine after famine. And if something has to be high, it has to be the Britishers. But that's not the case. Political norms. Remember, in a mass struggle, ideology and influence plays a critical role, right? And Congress succeeded in uniting different ideologies, different levels of commitments, and vastly different capacity of struggle to a common objective and principles because of its ideology, right? The idea being there was a constant debate and contention between individuals and groups who subscribed to divergent political ideologies and tendencies, though they had a common vision and were united in struggle, right? So think about the Khilafat movement and the non-cooperation movement running together. It tells you something that people who were so individually different could actually sit together and actually work. The national movement bequeathed to independent India a tradition of compromise, of accommodation, of reconciliation, right? And Nehru actually worked within this tradition in evolving national policies after independence. He invited B.R. Ambedkar to be the law minister. He was not even a part of the Congress party. He invited Swama Prakash Mukherjee to be the industries minister. He was again not a part of the Congress. Basically, he just chose the best person for the best jobs. And this was because of the highest norms of politics and political behavior was set up by the national movement. Dadabhai Naoroji, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, Lokmanya Tilak, Gandhi, Bhagat Singh, Subhash Chandra Bose, Sardar Patel, C. Rajagopalacharya, Jayaprakash Nair, all possessed moral integrity of the highest order. Finally, if you talk about the legacy of the national movement to be summarized, let's say in an answer, I'll say it is number one, commitment to political and economic independence. Number two, economic development. Number three, ending of inequality, oppression, and domination in all forms. Number four, a representative democracy and civil liberty. Number five, internationalism and independent foreign policy, the non-aligned movement. Number six, promotion of process of the national making based on the acceptance of the diversity that we have, and achieving an objective of accommodative politics with the majority of the large majority. We want the support of the majority, right? But remember, whatever the legacy the national movement has bequeathed us, it might endure for a long time. But remember, cannot endure forever, because we tend to remember we should legacies tend to erode and become irrelevant, unless they're constantly reinforced and redeveloped. And you can see the Republic Day celebration, Independence Day method to do that, right? Thank you so much. Right. If you have any questions, you can, as I said, you can email us at imprintknowledgesolutions@gmail.com, and that's our phone number, +91 6280 187 919. Do write to us or do comment on this. Any topic, anything you didn't understand, if you think I'm doing it too fast, anything, please comment.